Hey guys, ready to dive into another awesome story? Before we start, make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of the new stuff coming up. And don't forget to comment which stories you want to see around here. Let's get to the story. Atsundara Celestial Master, the Busta Sister, the Barefoot Poison Cultivator, the Immortal Swordsman in white silk clothes, 5 of the 6 most powerful beings in the world. And me? I'm Igolu, the first guy to reach immortality by cultivating pure, unlimited yang. But wait, cultivating pure yang means I can't have any kind of relationship with women, or I'd die. So what the hell am I supposed to do with this giant harem that's grown over the years? They're chasing me down, pressuring me to pick one, or they'll kill me. I had no choice but to ascend to heaven to escape. But hold on. They followed me? Now my harem from both worlds has joined forces. What's going to happen to me now? Let's find out. The yang skill, pure and unlimited, the strongest skill in the contemporary world. Learning its principles makes you essentially unmatched. In short, you can surpass countless opponents. Becoming a master of it makes you invincible throughout the world. However, the obstacles on the path to mastering it are extremely difficult. Not only is it necessary to understand the substances at the root of the universe, but one must also have an innate body for blades. And you must be capable of cultivating. That's why, for thousands of years, no one but the creator, the matriarch of Mushian, managed to learn even the basic techniques, let alone become a master. Except for one guy, the protagonist. His name is Yigulon, and he's the only person in the world capable of practicing pure, unlimited yang. He is currently the master of Mushian, spells, swordsmanship, cultivation in general. A master like him would enter the realm of the gods while still young. His cultivation is the strongest of all. Mushian is the most powerful sect on the continent, and he also has the best collection of magical artifacts one could have. He's practically worthy of being the strongest on the continent, a kid completely unmatched. The guy's got status, as you can see. Theoretically, the protagonist could be considered invincible in this world. However, a certain event greatly complicated his situation. Apparently, he was running from a woman, wondering if he could escape by entering the void of the universe's time regions. Meanwhile, the woman stared at him, casting some kind of spell. She was saying something like, "Burning thunder that haunts the cosmos. Spread the thunder of the god I know. Bring your wrath upon the atmosphere, destroying any demonic influences. Fly, endless sparkling light. Move swiftly like wings. 6 men, 6 leaders, fall thunder, like a weapon." This woman, still mysterious at that point, is called Lu Xiaoyu and is a celestial teacher in the realm of the immortal lands. After casting spells for half an hour, she finally manages to summon something that shoots toward the protagonist. As soon as he faces this spell, he's quite surprised by its immense power. That day, the peak of Lunghu Mountain was destroyed. After the blow, the protagonist comments aloud that a single strike destroyed the chi protecting his body, which was made up of 5 immortal swords. That woman's techniques were really on another level. But before he finishes speaking, another girl appears in front of him. Her name is Fei Hong, and she's the demonic master of the realm of the immortal lands. The protagonist gets a bit embarrassed when he sees her, greets her, and thinks to himself that, judging by the raw strength she used to leap that high, her harmony techniques are stronger than he imagined. She's like a crazy rabbit. The protagonist asks her if she still doesn't have anything to eat. The girl, caught off guard, ends up summoning some giant yellow arms behind her. Apparently, the name of this power is 30 celestial powers, which now send the protagonist crashing into the ground again. The poor guy complains that now even his protective cloak is toast. That's when another woman joins the scene, calling him brother. She's Yun Yu, the grand assistant master of the sect of the immortal lands. This girl asks if the protagonist is okay, and he, a bit awkwardly, tries to say he is. She says that as long as he doesn't get hurt again, everything's fine, and then she summons some kind of barrier spell that makes him feel immense pressure. The protagonist, upon realizing what she was planning, tries to question her, and the girl immediately replies that there will be no escape for him. That's when another kind of girl appears. This girl, who looks like a fairy, tells everyone to calm down, claiming she doesn't think this barrier is nearly enough to hold the protagonist. Her name is Yuzua Murong, and she's the current master of the 5 poison sect in the realm of the immortal lands. Then, she throws a droplet of poison toward the protagonist, stating that the spell should now belong to a poisoned immortal body. Apparently, he's screwed. As soon as it touches the protagonist's face, that droplet causes part of him to fall into a not-so-pleasant state. Realizing what was happening, he notices that this is the Immortal Executor's dispersing spell. He tries to ask her why, but another girl arrives, claiming she poisoned him, but that it's still not enough. She tells everyone that the protagonist managed to control the situation using his magic. Her name is Mu Bai, the master of the Shushan swordsman clan, also from the realm of the Immortal Lands. The protagonist, upon seeing her, realizes the situation wasn't going very well. However, this same girl, the last to interrupt, orders him to grab a sword she was about to summon and tells him to stand tall. And from the sky, the dragon-slaying swords fall. By the name alone, you can tell things were getting much stranger than before. The protagonist, noticing the name of the technique, remembers he was the one who taught her how to use it. The apprentice turning on her master. Yi Gyulan is the only person in the world capable of practicing pure and unlimited yang, spells, swordsmanship, cultivation in general. A master like him would surely enter the realm of the gods while still young. Among all these aspects, cultivation, sex, magical artifacts, he's number one, worthy of being the strongest on the continent. Theoretically, the protagonist could be considered invincible in this world. However, apparently, things were changing a lot around him. Even though he was practically unbeatable in every way, the situation he was facing now basically involved the 5 strongest people, besides him, teaming up to surround him. This made him pretty much unable to fight back. Completely ambushed, the protagonist tries to talk to them, pointing out that they joined forces to trap him all of a sudden. Then, he starts sucking up to them, claiming that under the current circumstances, there's nothing more he can teach them. He asks if this is how they propose a discussion on Tao techniques with him. Then, to the surprise of absolutely no one, all of them together asked which one he was going to choose. Now, we can clearly see the situation was way more complicated than expected. Once again, the poor guy got screwed, as always. As you can see, the protagonist's situation is basically this, not pleasant, to say the least. Now, to understand why all of this is happening to him, the protagonist will explain more about pure yang. He knows he said before that pure yang makes the user invincible in this world, but there's a major drawback. Now that we've reached this point, there are a few important things we need to discuss. Those who practice pure yang cannot be romantically involved with women, and vice versa. Otherwise, the side effects are intense, from coughing up blood to severe convulsions, and in the worst-case scenario, certain death. Apparently, the protagonist only learned about this too late from his master and, as expected, was completely pissed off when he found out he'd have to deal with all those consequences and hardships. In a rather funny scene, he beats the old man up for not telling him this before he started training, and now he didn't want the ability anymore and just wanted to cancel everything. And something even funnier is that the master said that if he tried to dissipate the ability, he would end up exploding and dying. That starts another beatdown on the old man. Now, the protagonist was really starting to question it all. How could a power like this have such a huge drawback? He even tried to believe that the old man was just messing with him, but to make it worse, besides his incredible talent, his body was also exceptional. It would be absolutely ridiculous if he didn't take the opportunity to fall for the most beautiful girls in the world. And we can clearly see that many of them really thought the protagonist was very handsome. There's even a tradition where, when a man receives silk pouches, it means they are love gifts sent by women. And apparently, the protagonist's classmates were quite jealous about it. I don't blame them, who told him to be an extreme heartthrob, even though he's actually kinda ugly. A little later, to the protagonist's great sadness, we realize that the drawback of not being able to do certain indecent things was actually true. Whenever he tried anything with the girls, who were in love with him, he would end up coughing up blood every single time. And I have no idea how he didn't have a serious hemorrhage after that. The protagonist constantly coughs up blood, and has convulsions every time things get intimate with the girls. Now, he could no longer believe that the old man was just messing around, and the poor guy absolutely hated the situation, since it basically meant he'd be forced to give up on all these great relationships he had with these women. The poor guy just wanted to get it on. But anyway, in this way, he was forced to suppress his instincts until the last day of his life. All that talk about dual cultivation was basically nonsense, since he'd be forced to remain a virgin forever. However, because of the time he used his powers over the last 3 years, all these women with whom he built strong bonds simply didn't want to leave his side. Back to the present moment, the protagonist tries to reason with them like the real masters they are, saying they should be learning martial arts, improving their cultivation base, or even building their own sections. He also says that worldly relationships between men and women are meaningless and asks if they're really taking all of this seriously. Based on their responses, we can gather some pretty funny things. Get ready for the following bombs. One of them says she's never been so serious about anything in her life as she is about the love she feels for the protagonist. Another claims they've known each other since childhood and keeps asking why he's doing this to her, saying he doesn't even have a heart. Another says that, at times like this, he needs to be a man. One says she doesn't mind giving him her toxic love, as long as he shows that desperation. Another says it seems like he didn't get it, but today he's not escaping. Stop with these hot threats right now! How would the protagonist resolve this? Apparently, it was a huge mystery to him at the time, since he obviously wanted all of them at the same time. Is it wrong for the poor guy to want that? Let's be honest. But if all of them attack him at once, he's definitely going down hard. At that moment, he tries to think of the most life-saving answer possible. He even considers choosing just one of them right there, but quickly comes back to reality. If he does that, the other four will surround him and kill him. Apparently, he doesn't have many choices at this point. But there's also the option of rejecting all of them. However, to his misfortune, he likes being alive. So, he'll have to find a way to get through this situation to survive above all else. That's when one of them says he has to give his answer that very same day, and that he better not even try to stall. They even use the argument that their divine chi swords had been destroyed. On top of that, his defensive robe no longer existed, and there was also that powerful spell that hit him right in the face. In other words, let me just reinforce my original idea here again, he was screwed. To make his situation even better, he had a cursed sword pointed at his head, and poison in his body. Basically, he didn't have the slightest chance of escaping this situation. And apparently, the poor guy already knew what fate awaited him. Even with his unmatched invincibility, there was nowhere left to run. However, he still must have had something in mind. That's when he asked the girls if they really thought they could defeat him using the techniques he taught them. After invoking a great spell that canceled the lamentation spells, he was finally standing again, free from all those bindings. In that situation, where the 5 strongest people had left him with no way out, with no visible escape, he decided to ascend to the heavens. As he flew, he told himself he had reached the peak of his mortal stage a long time ago, but he never thought he'd ascend like this in the end. During his mortal life, he had the power to rule the heavens. After that grand display, he constantly questioned whether he could still say his life was worth it. He fought to make his sect the number 1 through merit, became the enemy of the world after saving countless lives within the demonic sect, suppressed ancient giants, killed primordial beings, perfected talismans, sword techniques, and medical knowledge. The guy basically beat life. However, even if he could fool everyone, he couldn't fool himself. The accomplishments he amassed, the mountains he overcame, couldn't hide the regret and emptiness he felt in his heart. The poor guy really wanted, at least once, to try doing something with them. Now, he wondered what he could do, having ascended. If he had a second chance, he would never practice pure yang again. But he also wondered if he'd be able to see them again, if there were a next time. That's when he started calling out each of their names, saying they were all so cute when they weren't trying to kill him. That's when he sensed a wave of energy coming toward him. It was basically 5 heavenly tribulations, but none of them seemed to be aimed at him. He realized that all 5 girls were ascending too. Upon seeing that, he was shocked and surprised. However, he couldn't even worry too much, as his 5 senses and consciousness slowly began to fade away. His muscles started to dissipate as if they had never been there. That high this guy was on must have been out of this world. Then, he finally managed to bid farewell to the pure yang, claiming that maybe he wouldn't be invincible next time, but anything was better than practicing that damn technique again. His consciousness began to drift away. Shortly after that crazy high, the protagonist woke up in a completely unfamiliar room. The architecture around him was something he had never seen before. He wondered if that was the style of the immortal world. At that moment, he began to meditate to analyze his physical and mental state. All of his abilities had completely vanished. He finally understood that the ascension to immortality had forced him to start all over again. It was then that he heard breathing next to him. When he turned around, he saw a blonde girl, who appeared to be an elf, sleeping beside him. The protagonist, in the peak of his puberty, realized that this girl was much more beautiful than he expected and began to notice every detail she had, blonde hair, delicate long ears, a gentle face. Her beauty practically rivaled that of every girl he had seen before. It was truly dazzling to witness such a beautiful fairy. This girl really must belong to some kind of transcendent world, but it's truly a shame. Even with all those beautiful women around him, he ended up practicing pure yang. So at that moment, he didn't know how he was going to manage to get romantically involved with them. This immortal world is such an extraordinary place that it's no surprise everyone seeks Tao enlightenment to ascend. But then, at the peak of his intelligence, he realizes that from now on, he no longer has that skill that held him back. Now the big boy's free, if you know what I mean. As soon as he realizes that, his whole mood shifts, and now, he was finally free to do a few things that I'd rather not name, but he constantly refused to, since he considered himself a modest gentleman and couldn't imagine being so impulsive. But the protagonist, at that moment, ends up realizing that, of course, he needs to get to know the girl beside him first, so they can unite among the flowers and moonlight, and only then she might agree with him, even if still a bit hesitant about it. So he starts imagining things so vividly that he creates a very embarrassing scene. And to make things even more awkward, the fairy wakes up beside him completely pissed off, since she managed to hear everything he said. The protagonist tries to explain to her what was happening, but she calls him a pervert, and soon joins the others to hang him upside down from a tree. She asks the protagonist how he dared to sneak into her room, and while she said that, the girls around her told her to execute him. But then, they all came to an agreement that he was actually quite handsome, and now they started rooting for him to stay alive. The protagonist, once he got a good look at the faces of the elves, got really happy, because this place is undoubtedly the immortal world. That's when a mysterious voice appeared, asking what all the commotion was about and constantly questioning what was going on there. The big boss has arrived, ladies. One of them calls her the village leader. This leader asks Luna what the problem was, and she explains, saying there was a pervert there. She questions whether he was really a pervert, but Luna quickly confirms, saying he snuck into her room and stared at her while she slept. The leader, apparently upset about that, says that was quite the audacity, and asks someone to show her where the pervert was. And as soon as she looked at the protagonist, she realized he was actually very handsome and started asking if Luna was sure he was a bad guy, saying that, after all, there's no orc that handsome. One of them agrees with the leader, claiming that he definitely wasn't an orc. The leader, completely charmed by the protagonist, comments in front of him that this knight must be a lost traveler and kindly asks him to come to her room to rest a bit. Luna gets annoyed with her and calls her out. The leader realizes what she was doing and then plays dumb, asking if he had done anything to her. Luna denies it, saying he just stood around her bed, staring. The protagonist starts shouting an excuse, saying this is all just a misunderstanding, claiming that this young man here has an eye condition that forces him to stare at others, so he didn't mean to offend anyone. The leader, upon hearing that, asks the others what they thought of that response. As we can see, they already fell for the smooth talker. All of them apparently sided with the protagonist, saying he really was a very unfortunate person for being sick. Another agreed, saying he was so handsome and such a poor guy for having a disease like that. Another said this was a really sad situation. Another said she believed he even looked more handsome that way. The protagonist, realizing their innocence, wonders if they really had been fooled that easily. The leader finally comments that everyone's opinion was quite reasonable and agrees with them. In the end, he was just a poor sick traveler and tells them all to take him to a room to rest. Now, we can already guess that Missy's true intention. The leader was now in her room with the protagonist, apologizing for the resident's behavior toward him earlier. The protagonist says it was all right, and she puts her hand on his shoulder, saying that to make up for it, she would let him rest well while he was there, and asks for permission to personally serve him as a guest. The protagonist, meanwhile, notices that the woman really doesn't care about the fact that her breasts were pressing against his back. It was almost scary how bold she was. The protagonist, after thinking that, tells her that actually, ever since he arrived, he wanted to get to know the residents better, especially regarding the local culture and customs. The leader, upon hearing that, says he hadn't been there long, so it was understandable that he wanted to connect more with people. She also says he was quite honest, and that she never thought he'd have such a dirty mind, but if he was okay with an older woman like her, he shouldn't pity her, since that was what he wanted. And then she throws herself on him. The moment, to the audience's misfortune, was interrupted by that devil Luna opening the door. She found them in a not-so-presentable situation. The leader stands up and asks what the problem was. Luna, with determination in her eyes, replies that they received a report from the scouts saying orcs had been spotted. She then asks if that was really the problem. Luna confirms, claiming they were moving fast and should arrive at the village in approximately 3 days. Imagine if they were going slow. So, they turn to the protagonist and start beating the crap out of him, yelling at him to hurry up and prepare all the defenses. The leader, upon seeing the situation, says she understood that part but asks why she also has to hit him. Luna hits him again, saying she was doing it because she suspected he was a spy sent by the orcs. The leader tries to defend him, saying that was impossible. He was way too handsome to be involved with them. Luna says she understood and might really be wrong, but apparently didn't stop hitting him. I'm getting a whiff of tension here. The leader tells her to stop hitting the poor guy already. Then, we get to see the state the poor guy ended up in after the beating, and he kept asking himself what he had done wrong. Meanwhile, Luna asks the leader if it wouldn't be better to call for reinforcements from the city. The leader says she believes it's already too late for that. Then she asks what else they could do. The leader says that, since they've gotten to this point, there's one thing left to do. She walks up to the protagonist and tells him she'd like to ask for his help on behalf of the village, and kindly asks him to help defeat their #1 natural enemy, the orcs. A long time ago, mysterious gods and nobles were common in this world. The moon goddess, Bungfai, and the earth goddess, Sidamu, were great friends. They played in the forest every day. With their joyful and harmonious relationship, they spent days and nights having fun, until it all came to an end that day. The moon goddess asked why the other one had thrown used cucumbers on the ground like they were nothing, considering she was supposed to be very noble. The earth goddess questioned why she was even saying that, claiming she believed her to be a graceful and perfect goddess. Then she asked why she was accusing others as if she were some kind of demon. The moon goddess said that joke wasn't funny at all and asked why she was lying about such meaningless things, being the earth goddess and all. That's when the cursing began. The earth goddess told her to go to hell, and called her a girl who works in nightclubs for men's entertainment. She also told her to stop being so crazy, and to take that trash elsewhere. The moon goddess replied that she didn't need something big and wide, since she was pretty tight. However, that kind of thing matched perfectly with the fat, ugly tramp girl that she was. And thus, the two goddesses who were once so close turned against each other, starting the War of the Gods, a battle that burned in fury for many days and nights. In the end, they couldn't solve the problem and ended up going their separate ways. The leader, who was apparently the one telling this story, says that many years have passed since then, and that, as the protagonist must have realized by now, they are the elf descendants of the moon goddess. And those filthy orcs are descendants of the earth goddess. The protagonist, upon hearing this, is shocked when she adds that they're descendants of that soap cucumber vibe girl. Good lord, what kind of name is that? The protagonist, hearing that, asks how evolution works in this world and thinks to himself that he'd like to know more about those goddesses and their cucumber. Then, placing his hand on his head, he says he's starting to understand but still doesn't get why his help is so vital. The leader confesses that the elves are constantly defeated, and that's because of their fatal weakness. When they fight the orcs, their legs get weak, their faces blush, and they lose the will to resist. The protagonist, upon hearing that, says he thinks he understands everything about this legend now. And as for their weakness, it made sense considering the origin of the orcs. The protagonist takes the chance to ask if they really seem to like him since the day he arrived. The leader confirms, saying it's because of the prophecy. When he asks about that, she answers that the prophecy is written in the book of the gracious final prophecy. When she opens the book, it says that a foreign traveler who appears between two peaks will come to cleanse the impurities of their race. But unfortunately, in the end, the imposing pillar would be knocked down as well. The protagonist, reading this prophecy, internally questions how strange it is. And yeah, it really is, buddy. The leader continues saying that, according to the calendar, they're right on time, and that the person mentioned in the prophecy is him. Then, she starts touching the protagonist, asking what he thinks about it, and saying she would definitely never lie to him. After all, he saw with his own eyes what the book said. Luna starts checking the book and notices the ink is still fresh. She says so to everyone, claiming she thinks the leader had just written it. The leader gets flustered and says that's impossible, as it's the gracious final prophecy, which has been passed down through generations in her clan. The fact that the ink was fresh was a divine power of the holy book itself. Luna then asks why it says, "Please give me a man," on the back of the book. The leader lunges at her, telling her not to read the back part. Luna keeps reading a line that says, "It's so empty, lonely, and cold," but is soon interrupted as the leader starts beating her. At that moment, the protagonist realizes he has no idea what's going on in the immortal world and wonders if he really found this village by chance. These kinds of encounters, known for being random, are related to many incredible discoveries during one's immortal cultivation journey. They have a high reward rate, which can provide unique opportunities to improve one's cultivation. He was already very used to these encounters. For example, imagine picking up a suspicious stick on the road, and it turns out to be a super powerful sword. Or a little fish from the sea ends up being a divine legendary fish. Or you find an old ring at home that holds the spirit of a powerful elder. Or maybe you fall off a cliff while running from someone and end up getting a beautiful woman and ancient beasts from the forest. These setups are pretty cool. This mission might offer various chances for him to improve his abilities, so he should definitely accept it. He says they can count on him to take care of the problem. The leader walks up to him, thanking him profusely, and saying she knew he was a noble person. She also says that, by the way, they're going to pay him 100,000 gold coins. The protagonist refuses, saying there's no need. He's not the kind of hero chasing fame or fortune. Then she asks what he thinks about receiving 3 beautiful elf girls to serve him as maids. The protagonist then tells her to send one to his room that night as an advance payment, but he gets excited and asks her to send one right now. The leader plays along and says he's very decisive. She also says that, if he's fine with it, there's no problem, and that she herself could go to his room. However, this mood is ruined when Luna hits them both. The protagonist, with bumps on his head, says that, actually, they should deal with these trivial matters later, but that, either way, he would help them. The leader says that's great, and that she'll start the preparations right away. The protagonist, at that moment, asks for a second, claiming he needs a bit of time alone. Apparently, after that, he went to the bathroom nearby and, inside, noticed that the bathrooms in this world are truly exquisite. The architecture here is beautiful, you know? Now, he begins to analyze what remains of his power. As he had already confirmed before, his cultivation base had completely disappeared. However, the spiritual roots and meridians he had cultivated were still there, but apparently empty at the moment. So, he just needs to fill them with energy. He can also forget about magical weapons for now, since his body wouldn't be able to handle them. Then, he ends up coming across something called the Kunlun Box, Magic Space. Inside it, he has 99 immortal swords collected. He also manages to see the Guishu Sack, which is also a magical space, containing 108 precious treasures he had gathered. And he ends up surprised to realize they were still there. The protagonist, even knowing all that was there, still doesn't care much about it. So, he starts pulling one of the magical weapons from his arsenal, claiming that he's going to conquer the world. This space will determine his place in the immortal realm, and as he pulls the weapon, he starts laughing, saying it really seems like he was destined to reach the top. And now he's going to see what's inside. I won't even tell you, seriously. With this wave, the protagonist would be able to easily return to the top. But as soon as he manages to pull something from the gate, he ends up facing a wooden sword and a toilet paper man. Apparently, his evil plans fell apart, and his reaction was as expected, extreme surprise and disappointment upon seeing that. He kept questioning what had happened to his divine swords and irreplaceable treasures, and then probably comes to the conclusion that this must be a seal from the realm, but starts laughing at that idea, claiming that would be impossible. He probably just messed something up in the process. Then he tries to pull once again, aiming to return to the top, tries to get a better weapon than that one, but ends up finding exactly the same items. Upon realizing this, he gets extremely pissed and shocked by the fact that he is so weak that he can't access any of his immortal treasures. But it was clear that his realm was now so weak that he could only do simple things of such low quality, to his misfortune. While he was nearly crying over everything happening, he ends up sensing someone outside, watching him. He runs out toward the presence and manages to grab Luna's arm, who apparently got embarrassed after being caught watching him. The protagonist comments that she had acted so refined with the village leader, but now she was trying to spy on him while he was doing his business. She replies by completely denying it, claiming she was just passing by. The protagonist asks if her head accidentally fell through the window while she was passing. She tries to explain, saying she just wanted to see if he was an orc spy. The leader was passing by and decides to talk to them to ask what all the confusion was about. The protagonist tells her that Luna was watching him in the bathroom, and she tries to deny it. At that moment, the protagonist also says she probably even saw his two treasures. Okay, that had a double meaning if you realize it happened in the bathroom. The village leader, with a completely dirty and perverted mind, thinks that these two treasures referred to something a bit more intimate, which I'd rather not name here, the guy's eggs. As soon as the protagonist realizes where the conversation is going, he denies it, saying that wasn't the kind of treasure he meant, claiming she was just thinking nonsense. Then she pulls the protagonist, saying she was going to finish examining his body, and we see a slightly strange scene. A little after all that, the protagonist is being introduced to the strongest warriors of the village. The leader shows them all, claiming they are powerful archers from the village and are especially good at shooting. As soon as the protagonist hears that part, that they're good at shooting, he comments that he thinks he could create a combat plan based on that. It should work as long as they remember the signal positions and follow his instructions. While he was training them and giving them the plans, he ends up doing something completely weird and strange to see. I won't go into too much detail about what happened, but he ended up getting punched in the face. He tried doing it again, in an even worse way, and got the same result, his face getting hit several times. And apparently, that same thing happened multiple times during training. Now that he's beaten and at the end of the training, he compliments them all, saying that most of them have aptitude with their bows, so there's no problem, at least for most. The protagonist tells them that only a few weren't at the necessary level, so they could go to his room right now to be helped individually. Then we see two of them, completely attractive, claiming they wanted to go first. The protagonist gets completely weird and pervy again, thinking those two were progressing well, but hadn't reached the goal, so they should go to his room immediately to let him teach them personally. What a pervy little guy, seriously. At that moment, Luna shows up behind him, completely pissed off, and once again beats the crap out of him. For some reason, he keeps running, asking why he keeps getting abused by her, but that soon ends with the arrival of one of them bringing terrible news. The orcs are here. The leader is very shocked by this, as they were a day early, and a little later, we see one of the elves trying to face one of them, and apparently having those same weakness symptoms we saw earlier. Shortly after, most of the village was already taken by the orcs, who were being led by a specific one, who ordered them not to rush, since they didn't want the girls to get hurt. He tells them to capture everyone they see and wait so they could take them back together, and it's revealed to us that this orc giving the orders is the son of the great king, the new orc prince, Zuzadr. The orcs obeyed him blindly, gathering all of them in the same place. The prince introduced himself to them, claiming that it's their nature to be subjugated by them, and that's why, being inferior, they should feel honored to be in his presence. Then he tells them to kneel, and calls them slaves. Meanwhile, the protagonist instructs the girls to remember not to hit anyone who isn't in the crossfire, and orders the warrior elves to shoot. A rain of arrows managed to hit most of the orcs, and the prince, upon seeing that, wonders if they really had reinforcements. The protagonist keeps telling them to follow his previous instructions. They should focus their attacks on the leader. And then, apparently, they start casting some kind of spell that helped with concentration to fire all their arrows at the same time at the orc prince, who managed to see the protagonist and wonders if they really had a commander. But apparently, he manages to dodge all the arrows, laughing and saying they'd need more people if they wanted any results. What an arrogant bastard. One of them asked the protagonist if this would really work, and he told her to trust him. Then we see one of the arrows hit the prince's shoulder. At the same time, the archers kept casting that same spell to help them hit the target. And so it happened. This time, several arrows managed to hit him simultaneously. The protagonist knew this plan would work anyway, as it used arrows as flying swords to successfully form a sword formation, a wide variety of immortal swords he could use as a combat tactic, just like we're seeing now. And starting now, he's going to begin his journey back to the top. There's still a long way to go. The orc prince, after being hit by those arrows, appeared almost unscathed, even after taking several hits. This time, after removing the arrows, he commented that this was quite interesting, since he never imagined that a rundown village like this would cause him so many problems. But since things had reached this point, he'd have to pull out the big guns. So, he pulled out a cucumber, from who knows where, and held it up high, warning them they'd have to endure this now. As soon as he did, for some bizarre reason, all of them started becoming very weak. Most fell to the ground and couldn't even stand. The leader, barely able to move, told the protagonist that he had brought the orc's sacred treasure. He was a little surprised to realize it was a cucumber. The leader went on, saying that it was a sacred artifact of the orcs, and that no elf could resist its power. Folks, what is going on here? The prince started laughing hard after seeing the effect it had, claiming that all of them were now subject to his will. And all of this happened because on the way there, his father had asked him to transport the sacred artifact. When the leader heard that, she struggled to stay on her feet, saying that the residents of Lei had always believed in her, and even as a foolish old leader, she wouldn't let him win. Then, she bit her nail to draw blood, saying she would use the rest of her strength in a spell. She managed to smear the blood on her staff, calling upon the gods of fire and asking them to accept her blood as an offering. Then, after chanting a few spell words, she summoned a massive explosion. She then declared to the prince that she wouldn't let him lay a finger on them. The prince, realizing the power heading his way, commented that it was a level 6 attack spell, and questioned how a remote village like that could have such powerful magic. And if this was his end? He was just joking. Besides being strong, the guy knows how to be ironic. The prince admitted that, if he hadn't been there, maybe they would have succeeded, but he was a great master and stood above everyone else's power there, and so he easily crushed her attack. And for some bizarre reason, her clothes ended up getting torn by the attack. But, to your disappointment, not completely. As the leader fell, she apologized to her people for not succeeding, but before she hit the ground, the protagonist caught her, saying she had fought fiercely. And her appearance at that moment was something truly beautiful and unforgettable. He said this while covering her with a cloak. Apparently, he's the only one who came out of this with a win. Anyway, the leader started laughing, asking if he was really teasing her even at a time like this, and apologized, telling him to use the chance to escape from there. The protagonist called her attention, asking if she remembered the reward she had promised him earlier, and asked again if she was really going to gift him the 3 maids and herself. Then he said to leave the rest to him. The protagonist walked toward the prince, who, upon seeing him, questioned who had brought that weak human man there. The protagonist introduced himself, and the prince observed that he was a tall and handsome man, and that he could take him down with just one bite. He started mocking, saying that one strike would be enough to send him to the afterlife. The protagonist replied that he used to be at the top of the world, so he should have been enjoying all kinds of beauty and pleasures that came with it, but sadly it was impossible at the time. And now, he had 3 maids and a beautiful elf waiting for him. And now, he asked the prince if he really thought he'd let him take all of that away. The prince, as soon as he heard that, struck at the protagonist with all his might, but the protagonist simply raised 2 fingers of his hand and completely blocked the attack. The leader, seeing that, was stunned by the protagonist's strength and asked how that was possible, since that very same attack had nullified her level 6 magic spell, and he blocked it with just his hand. Then it's revealed that the protagonist was holding the toilet paper man again, and we get some details about this item. It can block any attack up to the nascent soul stage, and is made from toilet paper imbued with a large amount of spiritual power. It has poor cost efficiency and practicality, and is quite tedious to make, as it was created more as a joke. But in this moment, the protagonist opens that portal again, saying now it's his turn to attack. And now he was holding that same basic wooden sword, but apparently, something is different this time. Even the prince noticed that his greatest opponent at that moment was holding a simple wooden sword in front of him. Are you enjoying the story so far? Then make sure to drop a like to support the channel and comment what you think. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next stories, which are just as awesome. However, it seemed the prince didn't have much time to think about the wooden sword, since the protagonist immediately said that he could tell the prince hadn't reached the nascent soul stage, so he was trash compared to him. And finally, he slashed him with a single strike of the sword. The power of that attack was so strong that it took out half of the creature's body along with a large part of the ground, creating a huge fissure. The leader, seeing this scene, was stunned that the great master orc prince had been taken down with just one blow and asked if that was a legendary sacred sword. In truth, it wasn't a sacred sword, it was just a wooden one, the mahogany sword. Since the protagonist couldn't recover a high-grade sword, this one was a genuine common-grade weapon, though it was a bit different from your average common-grade sword. Just look, years ago, in a test, the protagonist faced the celestial master Lu Xiaoyu, and to add to her humiliation, he purposely chose one of the most ordinary weapons, this wooden mahogany sword. After that, he used a supreme refining technique on it to truly deliver his message. Eventually, it was declared that the winner of that fight was the mahogany sword. And the funny detail is that the master sword broke after that clash with the protagonist. After all that, the master who had been observing the fight begins to talk about what happened. The attack power of an ordinary grade mahogany sword is plus 1 point. With successful refinement, its attack increases by no more than 1, but being an ordinary grade sword, it is easily damaged during the refining process. However, the protagonist used an unparalleled technique to refine it 9,999 times. That's some pay-to-win nonsense right there. So, even though it still looks like an ordinary wooden sword, its attack power actually puts it above the average immortal sword. Then, he raised it to the skies, declaring that this treasure should be named the 9,999 times refined ordinary grade mahogany sword. The wooden sword that conquers everything up to the nascent soul stage. Now we can see that the protagonist only did that out of sheer arrogance, and never thought it would be useful to him later. He internally thanks the master he fought earlier. The protagonist goes on to say that, in the end, an ordinary grade sword was still an ordinary weapon, and he wouldn't be able to keep it intact after this single use. Luna steps out from behind the tree she was hiding behind, and asks if it's over. The protagonist starts showing off, saying that the prince was too weak, and now that the mission is finally over, he can ask the village chief for his reward of the 3 maids. He goes up to Luna, saying she's a bit of a tsundere, but not bad at all, and suggests choosing her as one of the 3. Then, looking deep into her eyes, he confesses he really just wanted to choose her, and asks what the big deal was. You wouldn't believe it. But apparently, the prince didn't die from that attack. In fact, he still had an orc racial talent called Berserk Blood. After suffering fatal damage, an orc goes insane with rage for a short time. The protagonist, as soon as he turned around to look, realized he had been way too careless during that fight. As soon as he saw the creature's axe coming at him, he pushed Luna out of harm's way, saying he still couldn't dodge it completely, but at the very least had to save her. While doing so, the protagonist realizes that even though he barely knew her, he still felt the need to save her. For some reason, that girl always felt familiar to him. And to our surprise, Luna calls him a fool and casts a spell, striking the prince head-on. But at that moment, the protagonist notices the spell is very familiar, and when he turns around, he finds someone else standing in Luna's place. In fact, it was the celestial master Lucioyu, who had been disguised this whole time. Now in her true form, she tells the protagonist that it's not like she was trying to save him or anything like that. The protagonist, just like us, the audience, is completely shocked by this unexpected revelation. But at that moment, he remembers that they also ascended at the same time as him, so it kind of makes sense. She then turns to the protagonist, calls him Master, and says she heard that all of his cultivation had vanished. Hearing that is basically like taking an arrow to the head, but he starts laughing, saying she was very polite to still call him Master. That beast still got pride, huh? Then he tells her that just calling him by his name is enough, but at that moment, she stomps and destroys the ground in front of him, asking how he could be so bold. She goes on to say that Master is so powerful he could ascend to the heavens even surrounded by the 5 of them, and that being in the immortal realm together with him makes her really happy. Apparently, she remembers every single naughty thing he said to each of the elves back in that world, recalling lines like, "Send one to my room tonight, I'll teach you intimately," and "choosing her as one of your maids." The fun part is that she said all this while casting multiple spells in his direction. And the guy, somehow, managed to dodge them all. After dodging, he asks her how she still has cultivation abilities, and demands she tell him her current realm. But she asks if he still dares to point a finger at her, and finally lands a direct hit with a spell. A little later, we see the protagonist talking with her in a place that looks a lot like a library. His condition is basically like a mouse that just got electrocuted, and he asks about something she mentioned before staying there for 3 whole months. She admits she only awakened at the core formation stage. The protagonist notes that she must have used a skill that allowed her to change her appearance, and she confirms, adding more details, she also rewrote her consciousness with another ability. The protagonist continues by saying that around them, the dream becomes a butterfly, and the butterfly becomes a dream. She used another technique to create a seal that hid her main consciousness, making her believe she was an elf. Basically, she put herself in a genjutsu on purpose. Anyway, he asks what condition had to be met for the seal to break. She replies that the conditions were either to face real danger or encounter another cultivator, and if both conditions were met, the seal would break. Afterward, they go to meet the village leader, who says that ever since Luna arrived 3 months ago, she had a feeling things wouldn't be that simple. The master thanks the leader and the villagers for taking care of her all that time. The leader says she should be the one thanking them for helping repel the orcs. She goes on to say that, strangely, foreign travelers came to dispel the dark forces surrounding their race, just as the prophecy foretold. The master then asks the village chief to keep everything that happened a secret, stating that she and the protagonist will be leaving the next day. The couple is taking their leave, with all due respect. But before the conversation can continue, the protagonist interrupts, saying there's something important he can't forget at that moment. He runs off, saying he didn't look for any treasure after fighting that orc. As soon as he gets to the looting spot, he finds a pile of charcoal in front of him. He's extremely frustrated to find only charcoal, especially since he had fairly high hopes for treasure. He starts rummaging through the charcoal, saying that such a big orc should have had weapons and equipment as tribute, but everything was gone. He wonders if the master really had to use that much power to take the creature down. But then, he sees a glimmer deep in the charcoal pile, and the flame of hope reignites in his heart. He starts digging frantically for that sparkle he saw, but to his deep misfortune, he actually finds it. That sparkle was, in fact, the orc's long and thick organ, if you know what I mean. The protagonist, the moment he sees that, loses his mind, asking how something like that was left behind, claiming it couldn't possibly be his treasure since it was completely useless now. But then, to his surprise, he finds something else in that charcoal pile, and this time, he finally discovers that Orcish relic, a cucumber, which I really don't want to explain the function of in detail. Xiaoyu arrives asking if the protagonist managed to find anything, but he quickly hides the cucumber in his clothes, saying it was nothing. Then, he starts acting, claiming it was all her fault, since everything had been hid by that spell and, basically, the remains were erased from existence. But before saying anything else, the protagonist runs to the village leader, and then shows her the cucumber. My god, this is getting very weird. As soon as she has a reaction that I'd rather not describe in detail, the protagonist covers the item, saying that it's really useful, and then bids her farewell. The context of this miserable cucumber is way too weird already. After a long night, it was finally time for the protagonist and his partner to say goodbye to that village. They tried to make him stay, but he goes to the leader asking about those 3 maids she had promised, but Xiaoyu beats him up, claiming that after this, they're taking sides. While they were leaving, the village leader calls the protagonist, asking him to wait, then walks up to him, grabs his hand, gives him a kiss on the cheek, and thanks him. She also says that, if he wants, he could come back to see her. Xiaoyu apparently wasn't too happy hearing that, and started hitting and chasing after the protagonist. Sometime later, a spell very similar to the one we saw earlier fell upon the village. The elves started to get nervous about it, but the leader tells them not to panic, since it was only the transfer technique of the Holy See. Then, we're faced with a girl with a very unique appearance. The elves were quite surprised by her, since she was a high-ranking knight from the Holy See. The leader now bowed to her, thinking to herself that she couldn't be just a simple high-ranking knight. In fact, she had to be a knight commander at the very least. But she ends up realizing that she is the Pope's knight, responsible for overseeing the entire province of Aid. The Pope's knight finally speaks, claiming that her reconnaissance knight told her that orcs were coming to invade. The leader confirms what she said, saying it's true, but luckily, a brave traveler came to help them deal with it. The woman accompanying the knight starts to examine the area and notices that the magical power she encountered had no trace of mana or demigod power. The protagonist's reputation is really something. The Pope's knight, upon hearing this, asks if, without mana or demigod power, they really managed to exterminate the great orc prince master. The woman asks the knight if she should ask the elves about the whereabouts of the orc's sacred items, but the Pope's knight denies it and orders them to leave. The woman tries to insist, saying that if this really is a hero, then a sacred object might have been taken as a trophy. The knight says that registered heroes have that right above all else. She continues saying that, however, even though the orc's sacred artifact is an insignificant relic, they are involved in matters related to the sacred item hunter, whom the Holy See is pursuing and capturing. She then orders her to bring the person responsible alive. The girl then removes her hood, saying that, as retainer knight Lydia, she will solemnly obey the sacred order. After a long journey, the protagonist and his partner were now on the outskirts of the city of Aid. She calls the protagonist an idiot, saying that this is not the immortal world, but another one instead. The protagonist agrees, saying he had already noticed because the aura circulation patterns were completely different there, seemingly more favorable for cultivation. She then denies what he said, claiming he obviously has no realm or cultivation base, and asks how he could perceive the flow of spiritual energy. He confesses that he established a foundation just the day before, but still hasn't found an effective technique. She apparently was surprised by how fast he managed to do that. He must be fast at other things too, which I'm definitely not going to mention. Let your imagination work that out. He continues, saying that, however, progressing from now on requires special effort, and thinking about it brings back terrible memories. She asks if maybe he encountered a bottleneck. He denies it, but says he found something absolutely dangerous in that place. He had just established a foundation at that time. Early in the morning one day, he was ordered by his master to descend the mountain and practice. Shortly after leaving, he encountered a demonic tiger spirit, for realms higher within the nascent soul stage. He felt that fighting this formidable enemy would greatly help his cultivation. After all, the pure, unlimited yang was still something completely unique in the world. He had to rely on his youthful vigor to put in the effort, and barely managed to kill it. Unexpectedly, right after, a demonic tiger spirit with a cultivation base of 1,000 years had arrived when the killing had just finished. Only then did he understand that those two demonic tiger spirits were close partners, and there was no escape for him. So he had to give his all in that fight. To his surprise, however, that 1,000-year-old male tiger had already been in a fight with an immortal cultivator, and was seriously injured. Believe it or not, he felt that the demonic tiger had been killed by him, and desperately tried to take revenge. But the protagonist panicked, during which a sword talisman struck him directly in his most vulnerable spot. The new wound empowered the old ones, and completely, the 1,000-year-old tiger was dead. The protagonist extracted the internal alchemy from both demonic tiger spirits, and took the opportunity to seize the male tiger's hide. Besides the abundant treasures, he had discovered an elder trapped in a cave, who was none other than the other immortal cultivator who had fought the male tiger. Although he had injured the demonic tiger, his immortal yin and yang were in disarray, and his nascent soul had been ruined and diminished. His body was on the brink of destruction, even his limbs. If he hadn't been accidentally found and rescued, he would have been obliterated by the tiger and died without dignity. The elder knew he wouldn't live long, so he passed on his remaining cultivation base to the protagonist and, from that point on, dissolved. Then, at night, he returned to the mountain for dinner, already in the nascent soul stage. The master questions the protagonist about already having told this story at least 800 times, and asks if he never gets tired of telling it, also adding that there's not a single female cultivator around to admire his legendary feats. The protagonist replies that there hadn't been a single motivator there either until she arrived, but his point is that there's no faster way to get stronger than hunting monsters and ending up in chance encounters. She continues, saying that, based on her experience being there for 3 months, his best bet would be to become an adventurer if he wants to kill monsters. The protagonist questions this part about being an adventurer, and then we get a brief introduction to what this adventurer thing is. Something already well known, but let's check it out anyway. An adventurer is someone skilled with weapons, a knight and bold, possessing a unique ability, and aspiring to free people from evil and bring peace to the world. By managing to annihilate monsters and demonic creatures, they complete commissions to earn money, improving both their strength and reputation. Successful adventurers have the opportunity to be promoted to registered heroes and become warriors admired by thousands of people. Registered heroes have unimaginable privileges, like talking to whoever they want, however they want, searching people's houses however they want, and, on top of that, they don't even need to hand over the loot they collected. The protagonist, at this moment, internally questions whether something that good could actually exist. He gets all excited and raises his hand, claiming he also wanted to become a registered hero. She questions whether it could be that easy, and tells them to go to the Adventurers Guild and register as adventurers as quickly as possible. Then, she starts heading toward the nearest one, which is located in Aid City. The protagonist, as soon as he leaves with her, was completely thrilled about his privileges of flirting freely, and, in the distance, that same green-haired knight was spying on the two. She manages to observe that, on the route they were following, they were indeed heading to Aid City, and thinks to herself that she'd better watch carefully, since he's the hero who stopped the great Master Orc Prince, after all. The guy's still riding high, huh? Now, in Ade's city, inside the Adventurers Guild, the receptionist type greets the protagonist and his partner, introducing them to Ade's city's Adventurers Guild. Then, we get to see the girl's appearance and notice that her clothes don't seem very appropriate, but even so, she asks how she could be of help to them. And the perverted protagonist, as soon as he saw that woman dressed like a bunny in front of him, basically entered a state of abnormal happiness. He was internally celebrating the fact that clothes in this world were so amazing, and then started imagining Xiaoyu wearing that kind of outfit too. She apparently realized what was going on in that boy's head, and immediately beat him up again. She now greets the receptionist, stating they would like to register as adventurers. After a few not-so-complicated procedures, the receptionist makes a suggestion for them, as newbie adventurers, to try defeating the Mystic Vine. It's a low-level monstrous creature, with weak fighting ability and a peculiar characteristic. It likes to harass passers-by and has a very low danger level. Our dear protagonist, with his baby-like mind as always, starts imagining the poor girl getting in trouble with this creature, and I'd rather not go into detail about that scene. But later, we can see that, in reality, after he got so hyped up about this adventure, it ends up being a very frustrating reality for him, since, in the end, the victim turned out to be himself. As soon as he was caught by the creature and became completely trapped and immobilized, he asked Xiaoyu for help, who then cast that same powerful spell of hers, and thus they managed to defeat the creature and complete the mission. A little later, that green-haired girl was observing them and taking notes. We get a look at the notes she was making. About Xiaoyu, she wrote that she's a young woman who seems not to need to chant while casting a lightning spell, and she needs to record something special about that. And about the protagonist, she wrote that he's a weak, scrawny, and very show-offish man. At this point, I started to feel offended. They're going too far. A bit later, they were back and now talking with that same receptionist from before, who praises them, saying they're very efficient for newbies and asks to introduce them to more difficult tasks, one after the other. However, as soon as he hears that, the protagonist refuses the offer, saying he'll choose something himself. Then, he ends up coming across another mission poster about a creature called Slime, which is a lower-class monstrous creature with extremely low fighting capability. Its special ability is mimicry, and it has a very low danger level. The protagonist, at this moment, ends up realizing that this would be his best offer, since it seemed to be a very simple monster to kill, and that way, he wouldn't have to get struck by lightning again. Now that he was decided, he accepts the mission and heads there with his partner. As soon as they arrived at the mission location, he was thinking to himself that, on that day, Xiaoyu would witness his battle with this monster and understand his value in this world. Just as he thought that, she ended up encountering the creature first and, by her reaction, seems to have some sort of phobia about it. The protagonist goes to her, trying to calm her down, claiming that it's just a slime, and that it was very small and cute. However, she keeps insisting that she doesn't want to see it, and tells him not to let that creature come near her. The protagonist ends up realizing that there's no similar monster like this in their original world, so he internally questions the possibility that this girl might be afraid of this kind of sticky monster. My God, what descriptive wording is this? The protagonist goes up to her, and says she's very cute. Apparently, neither she nor the creature could understand what the protagonist was trying to say, but he continues, saying that she always looked cute, and that it's also cute how she gets proud when he praises her. It's cute when she acts like a tsundere, hitting him with lightning, and when she's facing a scary monster. It's cute when she shows her weak side too. The protagonist continues, saying that she's obviously scared, and asks her not to act even cuter by trying to hide that from him. Then, the protagonist finally turns to the sticky monster, calling its attention, and asking how it dares try to violate that cuteness. Now, he gets into his fighting stance, claiming he must also show his true ability. Then, he begins to invoke his fighting technique. Supreme skill. Through his base, he's going to channel it into his domain. The foundation has been set, and now it was time for him to make a move. But at that moment, the slime also activated its mimicry ability. The protagonist, as soon as he saw this, realized that this ability was a move that could easily change shape and style. The objective of this move is to confuse the enemy, and it doesn't have much combat effectiveness. The protagonist had already figured out what was coming. However, to his surprise, that slime ends up taking the form of a girl completely identical to Xiaoyu, only apparently without clothes. much to the joy of our perverted protagonist. As we can see, the protagonist was completely caught off guard upon seeing that version of her, blue and naked. And upon realizing that it was learning his moves, in this case, he would need to reassess the situation, and especially the angle. But as soon as he comes across an angle I'd rather not specify, so much blood comes out of his nose that he ends up fainting on the ground, this time complaining that the creature wasn't giving proper importance to good combat ethics. Xiaoyu is quite embarrassed by the situation and decides to invoke her Five Thunders execution spell again, and this time she managed to eliminate the creature with just that spell. That same green-haired girl was making more notes about them. She already had practically a thesis ready on him. A little after that, the protagonist calls out to her, claiming that if she wasn't busy and had some free time, they could study the dream fusion of butterfly and water moon mirror flower through a demonstration. She replies, stating that it's not such a sophisticated technique and, therefore, he should study it on his own. The protagonist tries to insist, since ever since her cultivation surpassed his, he thought it would be proper to ask for her guidance. And apparently, as soon as she hears his words about her being superior to him, she ends up feeling quite moved by it, and finally responds that, if he asks her to teach him in that manner, she couldn't possibly refuse. After all, being willing to admit that his knowledge of abilities is lower than hers is something that requires a lot of courage on his part. She continues, saying she will give him a few lessons this time, and then tells him to pay attention, as she won't demonstrate it again. Right away, she uses the water moon mirror flower to change her appearance back to the previous form of Luna, and also uses her butterfly dream to alter someone's consciousness. Now, she begins to explain that when used together, both techniques create falsifications, which is true. However, no one can see through that transformation. The protagonist says, "Ah, so that's how it is. If that happens, she shouldn't be any different from a regular elf." And at that moment, he takes the opportunity to test that magical artifact from the orcs. Apparently, it started working on her, and she quickly asks what he was trying to do. At that moment, the protagonist takes advantage of the situation to make his demands. From now on, he'll only need her to promise him 3 things. First, she must not get mad at him anymore. Second, she must not strike him with lightning again. Third, from now on, she will call him Brother Yi. And if she swears to follow those 3 vows, he might consider releasing the magic immediately. The protagonist then asks why she isn't saying anything and remembers that she had become very arrogant in recent days, since her lightning strikes had become routine. He keeps going, saying he bets she didn't expect he had been hiding this secret weapon, and then starts mocking her, claiming that if she kept waving around like that, an accident could happen. But before he can continue his speech, he ends up showing off so much that it results in the artifact breaking. Such a great thing, you bastard. Now, with it completely destroyed, his hopes go down the drain. The protagonist, completely shocked by what just happened, begins to collect the artifact's remains and put them away. Then, he takes the opportunity to run away from there, and as he gets near the door, he talks to her, saying she worked hard over the last few days, and suggests she take a good rest while he completes the day's errands. Finally, he says goodbye to her, locks the door, and runs away as fast as he can. She, still inside the room, calls him an idiot, since, after all, it wasn't a real elf. So that thing technically couldn't have been effective on her. Besides, even without that orc thing, she still couldn't understand why he simply hadn't come to her directly. That same night, the protagonist continued completing the Adventurers Guild missions, and apparently managed to defeat a creature quite similar to a dragon with ease. As soon as he did so, he comments that the strength of this pseudo-legendary beast is around the nascent soul realm. Then, we get to see the details on the poster about this creature. It's a corrupted young dragon of pseudo-legendary rank. Its combat ability is incredibly high, and it has a skill called Corrosive Ring of Light, suppressible by vomiting its corrosive breath. It has an extremely high danger level, and the suggested method to defeat this creature is to form a team with a healer hero. But the protagonist didn't use that. Instead, he only used an immortal weapon, which seems to have the limit of conquering the nascent soul realm. At least he has high hopes, as we can see. The protagonist tells himself he must quickly raise his realm as high as he can, and soon starts walking out of the creature's cave like nothing had happened. Outside, that green-haired girl was watching him, as always, and she notices that he was just now leaving the corrupted young dragon's lair. But she couldn't understand what the protagonist was doing there, since it's impossible for an adventurer without a team, and without a healer to defeat a dragon of that level. She couldn't imagine a weakling like him pulling that off. But soon she regains focus, since, after so long following him, he was finally alone, and could now be taken into custody for examination. However, she's caught by surprise, by a mysterious voice asking if she had really waited for him to finally be alone after all this time following. The knight, at that moment, turns around completely surprised by this mysterious voice, and asks who's there, claiming that the Knight of the Sacred Vision needs to complete this task, and that this person has nothing to do with it. Then, she orders them to stay away from her immediately. But as soon as she looks at the person who approached, she realizes it's a succubus, who says that this was quite the coincidence, since she too had been waiting for the protagonist to be alone, but couldn't understand why the knight was following him like that. The knight orders her to disappear from there, claiming that she has no time to investigate whether or not she's qualified to practice succubus arts. Then, she tries to warn that if she interferes with her mission again, something will happen. However, the succubus interrupts her, claiming that it seems the knight still doesn't understand the situation she's in, and asks if she's asking to die, since she was following her brother like that. So, we find out that this girl was one of those pursuing the protagonist. That same weird one with a devilish tail. If Grandma saw me reading something like this, I'd be excommunicated from home. The knight, at this moment, asks how she dares strike a knight of the Sacred Vision. But apparently, she didn't care much about that and charges at her to attack, questioning that Sacred Vision and also asking if the knight knew what she did to people who insulted her brother's cult. Besides, she didn't even know how many people she had managed to kill. Then, she strikes the knight's shield with her warhammer. At that moment, the knight, feeling the impact of that weapon, realizes the girl has enormous power and immediately dodges the next attack to avoid another shock like that. The succubus continues attacking, saying the knight couldn't stop her. However, before she can say anything else, the knight uses a spell that traps the hammer in water, and with a punch to the weapon, she manages to knock it out of her opponent's hands. She basically put a warhammer inside a magic aquarium. The knight now raises her sword, telling the succubus not to underestimate the strength of the Sacred Vision Knights. But apparently, she wasn't the only one there capable of casting spells at will. The succubus manages to paralyze the knight's weapon inside a sort of magic cube, and this time asks if she's really resorting to the same old tricks, questioning how she could possibly be her rival right now. But the knight is too surprised and asks what kind of spell that is. The succubus then replies that it's Samushian, cloud formation, and as soon as she says that, the spell is cast again, hitting the knight directly and making her fly off the platform they were fighting on, crashing hard onto the ground. The succubus, at this moment, observes her from atop the platform, complaining that she no longer has enough energy to continue like this. She then begins to touch under her belly, complaining once more about her trust in feminine energy being quite short-lived. We notice that when the energy is sufficient, the marks she has start emitting a slightly stronger light. At that moment, she turns her back, saying that she should return and eat, starting to search for her hammer to leave as quickly as possible. I'll grab my Marita. Far from there, more specifically at the Adventurers Guild, the attendant begins to talk about an extra topic, quite enthusiastically. Apparently, it was a mission about a succubus, who was using magic illegally, and had already affected a large number of pure and innocent girls. She then goes over to Xiaoyu, asking if she wanted to take a look. Xiaoyu, at that exact moment, was thinking about where the protagonist had gone without notifying her. However, as soon as she encounters the poster the attendant is showing, she immediately recognizes the culprit responsible for that. We observe the details of the mission, which explain that the target is an outlaw succubus, a high-level monster with an apparently unknown combat ability. She had the skill to use suction during sleep and a tendency to target only young female victims. Additionally, she had a serious intelligence lapse, and the recommendation for dealing with her was to proceed with caution. Xiaoyu is so surprised that she stands up from the table, realizing that this is Yun Yu, and immediately grabs the poster from the attendant's hand, asking for the mission to be entrusted to her. Meanwhile, the protagonist ends up encountering the green-haired knight, who is unconscious on the floor. He comments that this world is so strange that it can even make girls fall from the sky like raindrops. He also observes that this girl lying there looks a bit like Yun Yu, although Yu is a bit chubbier. He then tries to approach her, but quickly corrects himself, claiming that he couldn't be insensitive to someone else's misfortune. So, he picks her up to carry her away, claiming there's no other way to see this except as a lucky encounter. Apparently, he was tending to her wounds and giving her a bath. At least this time, she was awake, so the atmosphere wouldn't be too awkward for us. Realizing she was awake, the protagonist starts explaining the procedure he was following, stating that he was using Reiki to treat her wounds successfully. Reiki allows her blood and internal chi to rise, achieving effective recovery. However, this rise can cause the whole body to burn with heat. If clothes and other personal items aren't removed in time, someone could burn themselves to destruction. Therefore, he completely took off her clothes to save her from danger, and he absolutely did not have any distracting thoughts during the process. Not knowing this little piece. Basically, that was the case, but he bets that she won't be able to understand what he's saying in these circumstances, and won't be convinced so easily. She ends up reacting completely as expected. She starts crying and runs away, calling him a pervert. The protagonist tries to ask her to calm down, but she keeps running until she reaches the cave entrance, where she realizes she's without clothes. She then returns to him, asking where they are. The protagonist confesses that, honestly, he couldn't understand the structure of her clothes, and when he took them off, the pieces automatically ripped. Still shocked by what she just heard, she starts hitting the protagonist, calling him a pervert again. This time, given the context, I'll have to fully understand the poor girl's side. The protagonist, still dazed by the situation, raises one of his hands in a pleading gesture and tries to ask her to wait just a second. His voice comes out breathlessly, and he argues that her situation would only worsen if she continued hitting him and, worse, walked around naked. However, his attempt to calm her down has an unexpected effect. The realization hits her again, as if she only fully understands what happened at that moment. Her face pales for a brief moment before blushing intensely, and her eyes show a mix of shame and growing fury. Desperation overtakes her, and her hands tremble as she tries to cover herself as best as she can. Then, with a trembling voice but full of anger, she yells that the protagonist will pay for her clothes, or if he refuses, he will have to die in her place. Without giving him time to react, she begins unleashing a stream of insults, each one more creative than the last. He, for his part, still bewildered, simply cannot understand the reason for so much cursing. Before anything else happens, the protagonist makes a suggestion to her and begins pulling some things from that portal we saw earlier. From inside it, he manages to pull out some clothes that are far from respectful but still clothes. With them in hand, he announces that now he has some options and asks if she would like to take one first to wear. He thinks to himself that he likes to keep these souvenirs from other girls. I won't even say anything about this. Noticing her reaction, the protagonist comments that if she finds those clothes too inappropriate, he still has others stored. He then pulls out 2 nightgowns, claiming that these styles are more intimate, but it's all he has. As soon as he notices her disapproval again, he turns his back, telling her to forget about it and do whatever she wants. At this point, the guy was already playing a mental game to see if she would give in. However, apparently, she didn't want the protagonist to leave her alone, and asked him to stay, claiming she wanted the pink nightgown. And now he was outside the cave, waiting for her to change, constantly asking if she was done so they could leave, but she always denied, claiming that the dress, which was actually a shirt, was very difficult to put on. And yes, apparently, the protagonist can only take clothes for her from that portal, but he's not helping her put them on. At least he was doing the minimum expected of a gentleman like him, right? After a long time, he asks if she has finally finished, but she denies again, saying not yet, and asks what he wants to do. The protagonist says it's not about what he wants, but that her body is still injured. Then, after some more time, he asks again if she's finally dressed, and by some miracle, she confirms this time, saying she's finally finished. The protagonist, at this moment, sighs in relief, since he's waited almost 2 years outside. And as soon as he enters the cave, he ends up finding her wearing that outfit already, but apparently, she was completely embarrassed to wear something so vulgar, and she starts calling out to the higher priest, since she couldn't do anything about wearing those clothes. She then tells the protagonist not to get any wrong ideas about it. But as soon as the protagonist understands what she meant, he begins to close his eyes in embarrassment, saying that those clothes aren't actually his, and she's misunderstanding everything, but that wasn't his point. And he soon starts explaining that the point is that, since she fell from such a great height, her 5 organs were injured, and since her agitation is preventing him from treating all of her wounds, she will continue to suffer for a long time if she keeps this up. She starts explaining that they, the Knights of the Sacred Vision, have the blessing and protection of God. And before she could explain further, The protagonist begins counting from 3 to 1. As soon as he finishes, she collapses to the ground from the weakness she feels. At this moment, the protagonist approaches her and begins explaining that, with her internal injuries, she will have such attacks for quite a long time. And, in fact, if she continues at this pace, he believes she won't survive until tomorrow. In her desperation, she starts telling the protagonist to swear by the Son of God that he will treat only her injuries and do nothing more than that. The protagonist, a bit embarrassed, agrees and asks what intentions she believes he has. He continues, saying that they've never met before, and he wasn't obligated to save her. He should just take the situation as an encounter between two good people with good intentions, basically a lucky twist of fate. And if she's really so reluctant to accept his help, she could just leave. I want to see her keep complaining like that. She then begins to explain that, for the Knights of the Sacred Vision, religious discipline is strict, and she was still a bit in a coma, but she wasn't thinking about anything wrong now, even though her mind was clear. The protagonist questions whether her mind is clear now, and she quickly explains, saying that he had just said the clothes must be removed to heal her. And the Son of God says that all people are sinners, and giving birth is a dirty act. If she agrees to remove her clothes in front of him while conscious, she would be accepting to show her dirty thing. She admits that this is implied, and that she's ready and willing to commit to him, and even after this, she is entirely his. Later that night, the succubus was feeding off the energy of some villagers, and now celebrated that she had finally filled her stomach completely. She thanks the girl who did this and comments that she needs to deal with the girl who fell earlier. Coincidentally, she begins syncing with Xiaoyu, who was also commenting that she had to find the protagonist and warn him about Yu. They start using different spells to try and locate him. Yu says that by using the traits of the battle formation, she can point to the direction of the little knight who was left behind, lying down. Xiaoyu says that with the protagonist's hair, socialism could show her the way. Now, the two finally manage to locate our dear protagonist. Hey everyone! Before I wrap up, I just want to thank everyone who's been liking, commenting, and sharing the videos. You guys are awesome. If it weren't for you, I would have dropped this like those manhwas that disappear without an ending. So keep showing support, because every like is a buff for the channel, and every comment gives me +10 motivation to bring more content for you. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.